I missed being with all of you last Sunday, but I need to tell you where I was. I have a several number of different pastors and ministry leaders that we meet with, we talk with, we work with as part of our ministry with Standing Stone, and one of those pastors is right over here in Orange. And he knew he was going to be having a very, very busy month of April. And so he asked if I would just come in and preach for him on a Sunday and just give him a Sunday off. He was still at church, but he was going to just needed a Sunday off. And so he'd scheduled me several weeks ahead knowing that that was coming. So that's what I was doing. I was pitch hitting, if you will, for another pastor last week. But I want to tell you about the most interesting conversation I had. This pastor has a couple of teenagers at home, and one of them is a 16-year-old sophomore in high school. His name is Ezra, and he introduced me to Ezra, and I was so glad to meet him because as this pastor and I usually talk about every week on the phone, we've just been praying for him and for his wife and raising their kids and so forth and so on. And now Ezra is 16, and he's getting his driver's license. So he came up and his dad introduced him, and then his dad walked away, and Ezra and I talked for a couple of minutes. And then he said something that just blessed my heart. He looked me in the eye. Now, a lot of kids that are 16 have a hard time looking an adult in the eye. But he looked me in the eye, and he said, "Pastor, I just want to thank you for filling in for my dad today, because since my dad was off and didn't have to preach, he took me to the movies last night." And I said, now, that's what this is all about, isn't it? The fact that this young man could express his appreciation to me that his dad had some special time to hang out with his son. Isn't that beautiful? So I missed you. I'm sorry I wasn't here, but I just want you to know I wasn't playing hooky. I was out doing the Lord's work, just in a different place, and sometimes the Lord can allow us to bless others in some wonderful ways. So anyways, great to be back with you today, and especially on this Mother's Day, because I have got a special message for all of our mothers. But I want to tell you, this isn't just for our moms today. This is really for all of us, because we're going to talk about a subject that is certainly relevant to our moms and grandmoms today, but it's relevant to each and every one of us, because today, from the life of David, we're going to talk about healing the hurts we don't deserve. There's a lot of times when people hurt us, either intentionally or unintentionally, and it just wounds us in our hearts, in our spirits. And we may not say anything, we may not let on, but we know we've been hurt. We know we've been wounded. And some of us are here today, and we are still carrying some of those wounds and some of those hurts with us, aren't we? Because they come to all of us, don't they, really, in a variety of different ways. For example, how many of us can think of a time maybe where we did our best? We did the best we could do. We worked hard at something. And what did we get in exchange? Criticism. Undeserved criticism. Joy and I talk every once in a while about sometimes those little things that our daughters can say. Sometimes our daughters, whether they realize it or not, can make a comment, can make a statement that's just like a little knife that just goes in and it just hurts. Moms, do you know what I'm talking about today? That can happen. Sometimes we get criticized for things we've done our best, and somebody complains, someone doesn't like it, someone's upset with it. Or how about this one? How many of us have found ourselves in a position where we were counting on somebody? They'd given us their word they were going to do something, and they let us down. Oh, that can be so disappointing and so hurtful. Or how about someone that we trusted as a friend? Maybe we had a long-term relationship with them, maybe over some years, and something went sideways in that relationship, and what happened? This friend we'd had for all these years suddenly turns against us. Oh, doesn't that hurt? Oh my goodness. Or how about this? Have you ever been blamed for doing something you didn't do? Boy, doesn't that happen. I remember the first time I had someone really, I got in the middle of something. I got blamed for something I had no part in. I was in second grade. Now, my father-in-law, Gene, was actually teaching at this elementary school. What grade did you teach at Santiago, Gene? Was it third? Third grade. So I was in second. I hadn't gotten to him yet, but his grade, fourth. Okay. So I'm in second grade, and I'm out on the playground at recess. Remember those days? And two of my friends were getting into a fight over here. And I thought, man, we can't have them fighting out here on the playground. So I run over there, and I'm starting to kind of get in the middle of it. I'm trying to pull them apart. And as I'm doing this, I get one guy off to the side. I'm kind of trying to calm the other guy down, and he's getting upset with me, and suddenly he's all over me, and just as I'm trying to get him settled down, guess who walks up? The teacher on lunch duty that day. Guess who gets called into the principal's office? Me. And I wasn't even in the fight, but they came up at just the wrong time when it looked like I was scuffling with this guy, and I was just trying to calm him down, but I got blamed for something I never did. So this whole idea of healing the hurts that we don't deserve. Boy, we've accumulated a lot of them over the years, haven't we? And some of those are still with us today, and we want to talk about how we can heal some of those hurts. But first of all, let me give you a couple of initial insights about some of these undeserved hurts and how we tend to deal with them. You know, sometimes a pattern can develop, and I think of this as not a healthy but an unhealthy pattern that we may not even be conscious of, but there's several steps that we sometimes go through when someone hurts or wounds us. And you'll notice I've got some blanks on your outline. I want to give you 4 words today that describe a pattern that sometimes happens in our life when someone hurts us. And so here's the first word. When someone hurts us, often our first reaction is what? Resentment. Resentment. We resent what somebody either said or did. Now, we may not say anything about it, we may not show it, but inside there's a feeling of resentment against that person because of what they said or because of what they did. Now, secondly, that resentment can grow into a second word, hatred. Hatred. Now you say that may be a little strong. Let's just call it a strong dislike. But sometimes when someone has hurt us and we've internalized that and we've kept that feeling down inside and it begins to grate on us, we begin to feel some animosity, some hatred toward that person because of what they have said, what they have done to us. And we have a feeling of ill will toward them. Okay, then thirdly, that can sometimes carry over into a grudge, which is just kind of a low, simmering attitude of displeasure that we have with someone who has hurt us. A grudge can sometimes develop. And then, finally, comes revenge. Maybe we've waited for the right time to strike back, and the right time has finally arrived, and now we're going to get even with that person. Now, as we think about the hurts that are undeserved that we've all experienced, I think we all understand, we all know what we should do, right? We should forgive. But how many of us have had the experience of trying to forgive someone for those undeserved hurts, and we found what? That for some reason, forgiveness just doesn't seem to work too well for us. We're well-meaning, we know we should forgive, we want to forgive, but for some reason, somehow it just doesn't seem like we're quite able to pull it off. And so I want to just give you a couple of observations about the best way to deal with undeserved hurts. You see, there's a problem that often occurs, and that is we make some mistakes when it comes to forgiveness. Let me give you 3 mistakes we often make, 3 traps we fall into in our endeavors to try to forgive another person. Okay? First of all, number one, sometimes a mistake we make, our forgiveness is ineffective because it's what I call conditional forgiveness. Conditional forgiveness. In other words, it says, I'll forgive you if, or I'll forgive you as soon as. I'll forgive you as soon as you come back and owe up to what you did. Or I'll come back and I'll forgive you when you make things right. Then I'll forgive you when you owe up to it. That's conditional forgiveness. It's waiting for someone else to do their part before I forgive them. It's based on what I'm expecting someone else to do. All right, second reason for forgiveness. That's why it's ineffective sometimes. And that is because we often offer partial forgiveness. Partial forgiveness. In other words, I'll forgive you, but I'm not going to forget what you did. Or I'll forgive you, but I don't want to ever see you again. I don't want to have to be around you anymore. Or I'll forgive you until it happens again. Then forget it. You see how we do that? There are a lot of people who are willing to forgive just as long as we don't have to see them anymore, or put up with them anymore, or be around them anymore. And so that's one of the reasons partial forgiveness is why forgiveness doesn't always work for us. And then here's the third problem we have. Sometimes our forgiveness is ineffective because, number three, it's delayed forgiveness. It's delayed forgiveness. In other words, I'll eventually forgive you when I get around to it. And so we delay our forgiveness. Why do we do that? Because we'd rather sit in the judgment seat than the mercy seat. In other words, I'll forgive you when I think you deserve it. I'll forgive you down the road when I think you've earned the right for me to forgive you. I'll forgive you when I think you've suffered long enough. Then maybe I'll forgive you. So we delay our forgiveness. So with some of those initial thoughts in mind, let's look at the scriptures. We're going to go to the Old Testament. We've been studying the life of David together. So if you have your Bible, I want you to turn with me this morning to 2 Samuel chapter 16. As you're turning there, I want to tell you a story that illustrates that little pattern I mentioned to you just a few moments ago of how resentment can become hatred, which can become a grudge, which can become what? Finally, revenge. One time there was a postal worker and he was out delivering mail, when all of a sudden one day he got bit by a neighbor's dog. The bite was so severe that the law required that dog to be put down. Well, as you can imagine, the neighbor who owned that dog was pretty upset over losing their pet. And this person went through some of those stages. Resentment quickly turned to hatred because their dog was put down, and that hatred quickly turned to a grudge, which ended up becoming revenge. This lady decided that if she didn't have her beloved pet any longer, he wasn't going to have any rest any longer. And she managed to get a hold of his phone number, and she literally called him night and day. She would not let up. She continued to terrorize him with her phone calls. He finally had to get a restraining order. Then there was finally a hearing. The judge told her in no uncertain terms, you are no longer, under any circumstances, ever to contact this man again. And if it continues, you're in jail. Well, guess what? She wasn't finished yet. She continued with her phone calls. She got thrown in jail. But do you know that even when she was thrown in jail, that didn't stop her? She tried to use a payphone to call him again in the prison. Well, I want to show you an example from the life of David where he dealt with a situation in his heart, in his life, that was totally and completely undeserved. Let's take a look at it together. Let me give you a little background. Remember where David is when this story unfolds. Remember, David has literally hit rock bottom in his life. He's had his affair with Bathsheba. A child has been born. That child died. Then his family was in disarray. Then Absalom rose up and challenged his father to take over the kingdom from him. David has lost all of his dignity. He has lost his throne. He's literally on the run for his life. As we come to 2 Samuel chapter 16, David is running away from his son Absalom when along comes a man by the name of Shimei to kick him when he's already down. Notice what he says in chapter 16, beginning in verse 5. When King David came to Bahurim, behold, there came out from there a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. He came out cursing continually as he came. He threw stones at David, and all the servants of King David, and all the people, and all the mighty men were at his right hand and at his left. Then Shimei said when he cursed, "Get out! Get out, you man of bloodshed, you worthless fellow. The Lord has returned upon you all the bloodshed of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. And behold, you are taken in your own evil, for you are a man of bloodshed." Oh my goodness. Talk about unfair. David didn't deserve any of those accusations, but notice this on your outline. Isn't it true that a major source of hurt often comes from what? The unfair treatment of others. That happens so often in our life, and none of us are immune to it. Even David himself, the king, experienced it firsthand. David didn't deserve any of these accusations by Shimei. He was completely innocent of any wrongdoing. He had not shed any blood. He had not unfairly taken over Saul's throne. That is something God had decided and done for him. It was unfair and unwarranted. Let me just ask you this question for a moment. Anybody here got any Shimeis in their life? Anybody who kicks you when you're down? Who adds insult on top of injury? Who accuses you of things you never did? Maybe even they may even make up things about you that are completely untrue. But that's what the gossip lines carry. Well, look at the counsel of one of David's friends. Abishai offers this word of advice to David in verse 9. Notice what it is. Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over now and cut off his head." I read that and I thought, where was Abishai when I needed him? In the face of these insulting charges, Abishai says, "King, let me take care of him." He offered to avenge the king with his own hands. But I believe we see an important lesson here, and I don't want us to miss this before we move on here. An important lesson in Abishai's response to what's going on. And here it is. Look at this on your outline. We need to beware of taking up a grudge for someone else. And that's what exactly what Abishai is doing right here. Beware of taking up someone else's offense for them. You know, I find so many times that people get upset about something, but it's not an offense against them directly. They're taking up the offense, the case, for someone else. Their friend has been hurt. Their friend has been wounded. And so they're going to jump on the bandwagon and they're going to get upset with this third party because of what's been done to their friend. Let me just tell you today, don't ever take up another person's offense for them. Don't we have enough offenses of our own to deal with without taking on somebody else's stuff? Absolutely. But sometimes we do that. The Bible says, be at peace with all men. We don't need to go out and take on someone else's grudge for them. Let it alone. Let them handle it. So how does David respond then to this unfair hurt? Moms, I want to ask you, are you still with me this morning? Are you listening? This is important. Look at David's response here in chapter 16 in verse 10. What did David say? The king said, "What have I to do with you, O sons of Zeruiah? If he curses, and if the Lord has told him, curse David, then who shall say, why have you done so?" Then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my son who came out from me seeks my life. How much more now this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him. Perhaps the Lord will look on my affliction and return good to me instead of his cursing this day." Now, isn't that interesting? How did David respond? He does not take this offense on himself. You say, why? For this simple reason. David's eyes were on God, not on Shimei and his cursing. David was able to see beyond the treatment of Shimei to realize that even his cursing was part of God's plan. You say, well, how could that be possible? Well, this is going to bring us to a very, very important principle today about forgiveness. If you can understand this one principle this morning, I can't tell you how greatly it will help you with the whole idea of forgiveness itself. Moms, mothers, others, are you ready for this? Here's the principle. Don't miss this. Forgiveness involves looking at the offender, the one who hurt us, as a divine instrument in God's hands. The principle is we need to take those who hurt us and wound us and see them as a tool in God's hands for the greater good He wants to accomplish in our lives. And that's exactly what David is doing right here. Instead of looking at Shimei's cursing and the wrong he committed against David, David was looking at God and what God was going to do through the blame, the accusations, and the cursings of Shimei. To David, Shimei was just a tool God was using to accomplish His greater purposes in David's life. So David took the focus off of Shimei and the wrong that he had done, and he placed it on how God was going to work through this on his behalf. You see, what is David doing here? He's looking at the big picture. So often when we're hurt and when we're wounded, what do? We look at the offender. We focus on them. And they become the subject of our anger and our hurt. And David is saying, no, I'm not looking at Shimei, as wrong as he is, as wrong as he was. That's not the issue here. God is doing something bigger. I want to look and see, how is Shimei being used as a tool in God's hands for God to be able to accomplish something greater in my life? And that's what I believe David is able to see right here. You know someone else who did exactly the same thing as David? Someone else in the Old Testament? It was Joseph. I want to invite you to keep your place. We're going to come back here, but for just a couple of minutes, would you turn to the book of Genesis with me? Genesis chapter 45. You need to see this. We're going to look at a couple of passages here, and this is so incredible. Remember the story of Joseph? Remember how his brothers were jealous of his position in the family because he was dad's favorite, even though he was the youngest? Remember that? And what did Joseph's brothers, what did they do to him? Remember, they sold him into slavery. They wanted to get rid of him, get him out of the household, get him out of the family. And so they sold him into slavery. Well, we know the story. You read the book of Genesis and what happens. If you read Joseph's account, there are 7 major ups and downs in his life until finally, guess what? He is promoted to the second in command to Pharaoh in Egypt. And then remember, there's a famine, right? And Joseph's father sends the brothers to Egypt to try to get food for them. And they get a hearing with a man they thought they didn't know and didn't recognize and had never met before. And they didn't even know they were standing in the presence of Joseph, the second highest ruler in Egypt, to make their request for food. And they didn't know who he was because it had been so many years they didn't recognize him. They're the ones that had thrown him into the pit, sold him into slavery, had no idea what had happened to him in the last 20 or 30 years. And so now, as we come to this passage in Genesis 45, guess what? Joseph is going to reveal himself to his brothers. And I want you to notice what he says about the experience and all that he's gone through. Did he blame his brothers? Boy, talk about, he could have, their heads could have been cut off immediately. But look at how he responds. This is incredible. Genesis 45, beginning in verse 4. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they came closer. And he said, can you just imagine this scene in your mind? What this must have felt like. He announces to them, "I am your brother Joseph, who you sold into slavery." Verse 5. "Now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting." Verse 7, "God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant in the earth." Verse 8, "Now therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over all the land of Egypt." In other words, he basically was Pharaoh's right-hand man who administrated and oversaw everything in the kingdom. We need to recognize that when we're hurt by someone, they should not become the focus of our hurt. Is the hurt real? Yes, it is. You might ask yourself the question, did God cause it? No, he didn't. But God did allow it, God did permit it, and God promises to use it. Even the hurt that's been done against us, God will use it for good. Isn't that the truth of Romans 8:28 that we'll put on the screen? I want you to read this together with me because this is God's promise to do something with the hurts in our life. Let's read it together. "And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purposes." God promises to use all things for good. Now, look in Genesis 45 again. I notice 1, 2, 3, 4 times in verses 5 through 9 that Joseph specifically credits God for what's happened in his life. He doesn't blame his brothers. They're not the focus. He looks beyond his brothers, sees his brothers as a tool in God's hand for God to accomplish a greater good, and now he's in a position of authority, and now he can provide food for his brothers and his family. God did it, he said. You say, well, what about when rape happens? What about incest? What about child abuse? You know, let's be honest, we don't often say this on Mother's Day, but do you know for some people, Mother's Day is the worst day of the year? Why? Because every time they think of mom, they think of abuse. Every time they think of mom, they think of unfair treatment. They think about rejection, a lack of love. A mother who didn't fulfill her true duties to a child, and that child has been forever scarred by it. And so Mother's Day is nothing more than a painful memory of all of that. Is all of that evil? Yes, it is. Is it terrible? Absolutely. And yet, here's the point. God can take even the evil done against us and use it for His purposes. Do you realize that's exactly what He did on the cross? That's exactly what we were just commemorating a few minutes ago. God used the unfair and unjust treatment of and death of His Son, the greatest evil ever committed in the history of mankind was committed against Jesus Christ, and yet God used it to fulfill His plan of redemption. Think about this. God took the greatest evil Satan could dish out, and He turned it into the greatest blessing. Wow. You see, you'll never experience true healing in your life from the wrongs you didn't deserve until you see that person, that act, as something God is going to use to accomplish something better in your life. Don't focus on the offender, don't focus on the offense, but instead focus on how is God going to use this for His greater good to make me more like Jesus, to help me grow, to help me become the kind of person He wants me to be. Do you realize you'll never be more like Jesus than when you forgive someone who doesn't deserve it? That is the epitome of Christ-likeness. Well, can I share another principle with you today? Let's go back here to our passage in 2 Samuel 16, if you would. Let me give you another principle about healing the hurts we don't deserve. And here it is. What is forgiveness? Forgiveness means leaving the responsibility for any further action with God. In other words, someone's hurt us, someone has wounded us, but instead of taking things into my own hands, what do? I leave them in God's hands. God can deal with that person better than I can. So instead of looking at Shimei's cursing and focusing on that and trying to get revenge, David says, I'm not going to touch him. I'm going to leave Shimei with God. God raised up Shimei to curse David. David even says that. Maybe the Lord raised him up to do what he's doing in verse 11. And if God raised him up, then what's the other side of it? Then it's up to God to deal with him and take care of him. I'm going to leave him in God's hands. And isn't that what we see? Let me just read this passage to you. Isn't that what we see in Romans chapter 12, verses 19 to 21? Listen to this. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. But if your enemy is hungry, feed him. And if he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In other words, don't lower yourself to that level, rise above it. That's what Paul is telling us to do in Romans chapter 12. Well, finally, let's look at the last scene in this story, if we might. We're in 2 Samuel 16, but would you just turn over to chapter 19? Let me show you how this story involving David and Shimei actually ends. So here's the last scene. When we come to chapter 19, the fortunes of war have changed. Absalom's rebellion has been squashed. David is returning to retake his throne once again. He's on his way back to Jerusalem, and as he's returning home to his throne in the capital city, guess who he encounters along the way? His name is Shimei. And look at what he says in verse 18. Then they kept crossing the ford to bring over the king's household and to do what was good in his sight. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. So he said to the king, "Let my lord not consider me guilty, nor remember what your servant did wrong on that day when my lord the king came out from Jerusalem, so that the king would take it to heart. For your servant knows that I have sinned. Therefore, behold, I have come today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to go down to meet my lord the king." What is he doing? He realizes David's coming back into power, and I better make things right. I better try to get things squared away with the king, or it's going to be in my head. And he comes and he confesses to David the wrong that he has done. But there's good old Abishai again, and he has some advice for the king that he offers. And notice what he says. Notice Abishai is like that little voice in verse 21 we sometimes hear. Look at what he says. But Abishai, notice, said, "Should not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" I often think of what Abishai is suggesting there. It's kind of like a reminder of that little voice in our head that sometimes says, now you can get some revenge. Abishai is offering to do it for David. But how is David going to respond? Look at verse 22. What does he say? But then David said, "What have I to do with you?" I can just see David shaking his head. "Should any man be put to death in Israel today? For I do not know that I am king over Israel. For do I not know that I am king over Israel?" The king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." Thus the king swore to him. What is forgiveness? Let me offer this definition. What is forgiveness? How do we deal with the hurts that we do not deserve? Forgiveness is this. Forgiveness is choosing to show mercy when we feel no mercy is due. David had the right to deal with Shimei, but he offered mercy instead of revenge. In other words, what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is choosing to clear another person's record even when they don't deserve it, or even if they don't ever ask for it. It is setting the other person free. Forgiveness is letting them off the hook. I like what someone said about forgiveness. Would you put that quote up there? This is good. Here's another way of looking at it. Forgiveness is the fragrance the violet shed on the heel that has crushed it. So, moms, let me just offer you 3 ideas as we wrap things up today. Could we do that real quick here in the last couple of minutes we have together? 3 suggestions that we need to think about in healing the hurts we don't deserve. So here they are. Number 1. First of all, let's talk about a barrier to forgiveness. One barrier to forgiveness, let's be honest, is that sometimes we actually enjoy hating the one who hurt us. We actually enjoy hating the one who hurt us. Now, we probably wouldn't admit that to anybody else, but if we're really honest, sometimes it feels good to hate someone and we don't want to give it up. We don't want to let go of it. Like that lady who wanted to get her pound of revenge against that postal worker. It's probably what kept her going every day. It gave her purpose and meaning. Without hate, some people would be lost. Before we forgive, we've got to be willing to let go of the hurt and the hate and the dislike. Okay, number 2, second principle. Forgiveness is both an act and a process. Forgiveness is both an act and a process. You say, what do you mean by that? Forgiveness begins when I make the decision to act with forgiveness, to forgive someone. I choose to forgive. But how many times do we forgive and still find that that memory, that hurt, resurfaces sometime later? That's okay. As often as the hurt returns, forgive again. And then again. And then again. That's why forgiveness is an act we choose to do, but we may have to repeat the process a number of times in order for that forgiveness to continue to take hold in our hearts. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with us. It just means we're human. Memories have a way of coming back. Hurts have a way of returning. That's okay. Just use that as an indication that I just need to choose to forgive again. It's both an act and a process. And then number three, forgiveness is made easier when we remember how much God has forgiven me. Forgiveness becomes easier when we remember how much God has forgiven us. Story is told of a seminary student. His name was Aaron. And as he looked forward to the summer, he hoped he would get a job working as an intern in a church. But when nothing materialized, he took the only job he could find, and guess what it was? He became a bus driver on the south side of Chicago. It was a dangerous neighborhood, a dangerous community. After learning the route, this rookie bus driver was on his own. And it wasn't long before he realized just how dangerous this part of town could actually be. When one day he's out driving and he makes a stop and a gang comes on board. They walked right past him without paying. They made rude and discourteous comments to others riding on the bus, rode as long as they wanted and got off. This happened several days in a row. Finally, the bus driver said, I need to do something. Noticed a policeman up ahead, pulled over, told the policeman what happened. The policeman got on, told the gang to either pay what they owed or get off. Problem was, they paid, the policeman got off, they stayed on. Bus made another stop, and the next thing this young bus driver realized is he woke up bruised and bloodied on the floor of the bus. The gang had beaten him up. He decided to press charges, and finally he had his day in court. The gang was ushered into the courtroom, and they glared across the room at this young seminary student. And it was as he saw their glaring look that something took hold of his heart in a strange and different way than he would have ever imagined before. Suddenly, there were no longer bitter thoughts, but thoughts of compassion. His heart began to go out to these guys who had attacked him. And under the Spirit's control, he no longer hated them, he began to pity them. They needed help, not hate. But what could he do? Suddenly, after there had been a plea of guilty, Aaron, to the surprise of everyone in the courtroom, stood to his feet and asked permission to speak. He said, Your Honor, I would like you to total up all the days of punishment against these men, all the time sentenced against them, and I request that you allow me to go to jail in their place. Whoa. The judge, the attorneys were absolutely stunned by what they had just heard. The dumbfounded judge said, when he reached a level of composure, said rather firmly, "Young man, you're out of order. This thing has never been done before." To which the young man replied with genius insight, "Oh, yes, it has. Yes, it has, Your Honor. It happened over 19 centuries ago when a man from Galilee paid the penalty that all mankind deserved." And then for the next 3 or 4 minutes, without interruption, he explained to the entire courtroom how Jesus Christ had died on the cross on our behalf, proving and providing God's love and forgiveness for everyone. Wow, what an incredible, incredible testimony. Forgiveness is made easier when we realize what Jesus has done on the cross for us. Would you bow with me in prayer for a moment? And as our heads are bowed and our eyes are closed, has the Lord brought someone to mind that we need to forgive today? Do you have any undeserved hurts that you'd like to see healed? Do you realize forgiveness is the only way to do it? And I'd like to just invite you right now. Maybe there's a name or two, a face, a situation, something that happened to you has been brought back to mind this morning. Would you be willing to take that person, those people? Maybe it was an employer. Maybe it was another employee. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a neighbor. Maybe a former friend. Would you be willing to say, "God, with your help, I choose to forgive." You fill in the blank. I choose to forgive for whatever it was they did. Maybe you've done it in the past, but maybe we need to do it again today. If it still hurts, if it still bothers us, then it still needs forgiving. Do it again. Or perhaps do it for the first time. Father, how we thank you today for being our ultimate forgiver. For it's only as we have been forgiven by you that we can even begin to understand what it means to forgive others. Lord, help us heal through forgiveness those hurts we don't deserve. We pray. Amen.